Well, welcome back, Paul.
Thank you.
It's good to be here again. Since we last talked, there's even been more conversations and changes about division with Maori and Te Reo Maori.
Yeah, it feels kind of like somebody's got a crowbar and just going side to side. And what can I do to make things, seem like a lot of division out there and pull people apart?
This one seemed to be, there was no kind of involvement or very little involvement in conversation with the community about changes to from Rongotai to Wellington Bays, and these are just not name changes.
Yeah.
They're way more than that.
Yeah, I think the problem with an electorate, because it's so big, it's really hard to find a name that's going to encompass absolutely everything in there, unless you're in like a really specific urban area like Auckland, for example, where the population base is so much more intense and so dense, you can have smaller electorates. But when you're dealing with electorates that are absolutely massive, finding the right name is a bit of a challenge, and people get kind of an identity put towards the area that they find themselves in. You look at something like Rongotai, it's the sound of the sea. It's a beautiful name. Wellington Bays, there's like 1 million bays in Wellington. It doesn't stand out. But it's a fascinating thing to see happen, but to see the backlash to it as well is really interesting, because we know that it feels like it's a kind of political move, but the Electoral Commission is supposed to be non-partisan. But it's obviously the rhetoric that we're getting out of the current government. Yeah,
you're right. This latest thing, even though the Representation Review Authority came to their final determination, it has to be signed off by a minister, Minister Goldsmith in this case. And it's not in isolation, because it comes on the back of nearly 2 years of people in the current administration and coalition pushing Te Reo down.
Yes. Yeah, and it's kind of weird to watch, because we had such a good reputation around this. It was
internationally too.
Internationally, yeah. It was, let's take on board what's happened in the past. Let's find ways to make sure that we are ensuring that people who grow up in the country know that this is a multinational, a multicultural country with a whole bunch of different outlooks, beliefs, and backgrounds. And now it feels very much like, the colonizers are coming in, and you guys can go back into the shadow over there, and we don't want to make sure you feel like you are part of the society that we built around you.
I see these things, Paul, not a kind of argument of political left or right. The pendulum we often talk about in traditional political movements, it swings this way and swings that way, and it does often. Parties come and go, they get worn out. This current government has been quite divisive from the get-go, because it's beholden to quite extreme minor parties, which an old National Party wouldn't have allowed.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is very much a different National Party to what we saw under Key or Bolger. I think what's really interesting, though, is people have this idea that the current National Party is the moderate one out of the groups.
Right.
But during the campaign itself, we saw National Party MPs stand up in front of crowds and use some of those racist dog whistles that the other parties were using. Things like, what do you think in co-governance? Well, I believe in one person, one vote, kind of dog whistles. We also know that some of the policy changes that we've seen come through that feel like they're more extreme, like the removal of guidelines from the Sports NZ website around trans inclusion in amateur sports. That was driven by National Party supporters, not by the supporters of ACT or New Zealand First, who tend to be a little bit more upset about that kind of thing, which is a really fascinating thing to see. It shows that the current National Party supporter base might be a little bit more right-leaning than they actually give themselves credit for.
However, we did see Peters push this bathroom stuff.
Yeah, and that I think has been kind of fascinating as well, because the bill's changed a number of times. Originally it was around bathroom bills, and then it was around amateur sports, and you can only have so many bills in the tin, like so many members' bills. So he's literally had to go, we're going to pull this one out and put that one in, and we're going to change this again and put that one in, which shows a real lack of consistency. But what I've found really fascinating about that has actually been Tanya Unkovic. Since she left Parliament, she's been doing the far-right media sphere around a lot of religious stuff, religious radio stations and things like that, going, I'm glad that we did this. And she's getting people really worked up and going on out there saying, you know what, I can say what I want now because I'm not an MP. Not like she couldn't do it before, because she's always been very open about her perspective on these things. It's fascinating to watch.
I wonder sometimes, and I'm sure Peters and the New Zealand First cohorts are quite deliberate in their approach here, because but picking issues and trying to invent and create laws for things that don't exist, problems that don't exist.
Yeah.
I don't think there's been anybody before a court in New Zealand because a man, in their eyes, has walked into a woman's bathroom and assaulted somebody.
It's never happened.
No.
What we do know is when we had is it Posey Parker was her name?
Yes.
I always get her and the actress Parker Posey mixed up in names. When we had the activist come over here, there was a lot of information that was accessed by the police, by a lot of people doing research into this, that showed that we have never, ever in this country had an assault in a bathroom or a changing room of a trans person attacking a non-trans person. We have had it happen the other way. We've seen it happen the other way a number of times in the research and what the police data says. There is far more danger for a trans person to go into one of those spaces and not feel safe. Right. And that's a real concern, but that doesn't get played up in the media. It doesn't get played up by this political rhetoric.
So leads us into the conversation about now the current government's been in for nearly 2 years, I think.
Yeah. It feels like longer.
Yeah, but you'd have to argue and say that Luxon really hasn't resonated.
No.
And hasn't taken hold. You know, to define his political nous or what he's trying to do is hard.
It is.
You know, he's not charismatic.
No.
You know, I worked for the Nats back in the mid '90s in Parliament as a researcher, and you find now the current political course they're on. Seems like he's either not going to last the distance and they'll change leadership, or they won't get re-elected.
Yes.
But I know within the Nats themselves, they're not very impressed.
No, he was always he was heralded as the second coming of John Key.
Right.
You know, here's a business person who's become an MP. You know, that kind of.
I ran an airline.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And I think that a lot of the Nats are a bit disappointed with what they got, and they also, it might have been harder to see before the election, but since the election, he's been on the knee to David and Winston. They get what they want because he knows if they don't get what they want, they will walk away and there goes the coalition. He's in a very weak position. But if we look at the tracking numbers as well from the opinion polls, he's never done particularly well in popularity polls. Right. There was a lot of talk at the 2023 general election of, can a party be elected with an unpopular leader? It can. We saw it happen. But that unpopularity of the leader does bring the party down. So the Nats have sort of dug themselves a hole on this one. And if they go and change the leader now, 12 months out from the election, how bad does that look? You know, we've got no confidence in what we're doing, unless there was like an actual reason for it, a terrible tragedy, for example, and for some reason Luxon couldn't continue with the job. Nobody would have an issue with a new leader there for obvious reasons. But we're rolling him because we're doing badly in the polls after 12 months in the country with a mass exodus and terrible economics. And
oddly though, we saw in Jacinda's appointment as leader, we saw a phoenix within months out from election and had an extraordinary election role there to come through. So, and I can't help but think of Bulger's birthday just recently when he turned 90 a few months ago, and he was saying that Luxon should tell Seymour to go and shut up. That's his quote, actually.
Yeah.
You know, and it is hard managing a coalition when you've got two very disparate parties.
Yeah.
But he hasn't been strong in managing these kind of extremes.
No. And I think there's also, when the general public sits down and looks at how he's reacted to certain things, you know, there are things that the public goes, well, you need to sit down and talk to that MP about. You know, the leaked documents around Casey Costello and smoking, for example. Right. Or New Zealand First and mining lobby claims around Shane Jones. That gets nowhere because he can't do it because the coalition won't allow it. But the MPs that he has punished in his own caucus have all been women, and men don't seem to get punished.
Right.
And that's a really bad look.
A couple of things I'd like to touch on in this conversation today is that some people, you know, get saturated with political stuff online and they don't want to get involved in it. They say, well, politics doesn't affect me. But of course, it impacts every part of your life.
Yeah.
And it, you know, the chap who works in the tradie and the woman who works in the local supermarket or vice versa, they don't want to get involved in these conversations. They're very toxic online. You know, how do you feel about the average person down the street?
I can understand how it feels overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah,
I totally get that. At the same time, everybody's life is impacted by something to do with politics. Like we're sitting in a park at the moment that is brought to you by the ratepayers of Auckland. You know, everybody who pays rates has something to do with this particular space here in some way. the footpath that you get here on, the streets that you drive on, the rubbish collection, the water supply. From a local level, everything in local government impacts people's lives. On a national level, there is a whole bunch of food safety stuff, for example, that we've just dealt with in the cafe out there. Those standards are set by central government.
Right.
Speed limits down there, central government. There's a beach just down there. Foreshore and seabed is definitely central government, and they don't have a really good track history of it.
Right.
So I think people sometimes just need to pull themselves back a little bit and think of the bigger picture. Like, I know my daughter-in-law, for example, hates politics, absolutely hates it. Her stepfather is running for a council position in Hamilton, and she's sitting there saying to me, I didn't even know he was running until I rang her up about it.
Right. One thing that's fascinating to me, and you've got quite a bit of experience in the social media space, but often people now, and we've learnt this after the Cambridge Analytica story with the first Trump presidency, that people sit now in a political and a information vacuum.
Yes.
So, if you like things about whatever, that's what you'll be fed to.
Yes.
If you're an older demographic, they've found out about your buying habits.
Yes.
We've seen all this, and you get fed that kind of information that adds that kind of conversation. So in political discourse, it's really difficult to have disparate or even diverse or divergent conversations with people online who hold different views, because they're not in that realm, and then they get directly antagonistic. So, this vacuum thing and algorithms, the way they're managing our online space, we never saw this before. And of course, famously, just to wrap up that kind of long-winded question, people would say things like, well, I got what I did my own research, you know, famously.
I'm just asking questions. Yeah, it's really interesting as well when we track how social media has impacted political discourse, because there's a really clear creation of bubbles. I'm fed the things that I like or that my friends like, so in theory I'm probably going to like them because I'm friends with that person. There's a lot of work that goes into it. But there's also tools out there for tracking. For example, every major political party, I think it was, with the possible exception of Te Pāti Māori at the last election, used a tracking tool called a pixel. And it's literally just embedded on their website. It's called a pixel because that's how big it is. It tracks where you've been on the internet, where you're going, like where you go to for the next couple of visits on the internet. So it can get an idea as to what your behaviors are like. So it can then make sure that it's feeding the right information to you in ads or in the way that the algorithm feeds you up stuff on your social media feeds. Every party uses it. Most advertisers use it these days. Like it's big, but people don't realize that it's there. We are being trained by the algorithm to see things a certain way. And we also know from leaks that came from Facebook actually a couple of years ago, algorithms feed on anger and divisiveness and conflict. You did something in a recent video on your channel, which I'll link below here again, about sentiment tracking. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit, is that similar to this pixel?
Kind of. Sentiment tracking is more of an outside looking in instead of being inside staring at you.
Right.
And what it does is it scrapes information. So it'll take a look at a Facebook page, for example, that's open to the public. It's not going to go into private information. And it's going to go, okay, somebody posted this comment saying, I like cheese. Okay, what's the reaction to that like? Are the comments positive comments like, yes, cheese is great, awesome, amazing? Or are they negative comments like, nah, cheese sucks, I don't like cheese, it's boring? It tracks what the sentiment is, but also how many people are commenting? How big is that group that's commenting? Where do they come from? Are the people commenting just from, a small town that makes cheese, or are they coming from an entire country? So there's a lot of information that it pulls to be able to see how the public feels about things. It's a really fascinating tool that we can use for pretty much anything. So
this kind of puts me into the wind-up conversation here, but would you put yourself as a pessimist or an optimist? Because the reason I ask that is because there's often this thing that's said, people who want to stand for public office or a public local committee or a residents group, why would you want to do that these days? Because you're just going to get knocked online, and the tall poppy Kiwi thing comes and whacks you down, and vitriol and divisiveness and hatred. And if they sat next to you at a table like we are right now, they probably wouldn't talk with that same tone.
No, 9 times out of 10 they don't. And I always sort of I've been asked a few times, why would I do this? Like, why would I put my name forward in the current environment? And I get it. And there are some groups that it certainly get it worse than others. Wahine Māori, for example,
Right.
they get a lot more vitriol than say Pākehā men. I think it's important people are seen. I think it's important that people are heard, no matter who they are or where they're from, with the possible exception of, neo-Nazi white supremacists. But at the same time, he has, at the moment, just as much right to run as anybody else and to be shot down. When it comes to that vitriol, though, that we see online, again, it's about antagonism. It's about creating that conflict that's going to move algorithms. But I think we can also say you get good people standing, you get good people elected. And that's the important thing. And the longer that you have good people in council, the more normalised it becomes. The better long-term thinking that you can do, better long-term planning, say a council can do. If you've got people around that table who all look like you, how often are they taking on board things like disability issues or local mana whenua needs or all of that kind of stuff? And it might be a consideration, but it's not a lived experience, so it can't inform the same way. That's why I think we need good people to run all the time. And you can always tell the haters to go away.
Yeah, in Kapiti we have an agreement, one of the longest on local government across country, of partnership with iwi, which we just re-signed a few weeks ago. And as you said, having people with lived experience, and it brings more robust, more whole conversations to the table. And you have a better way of working through an issue.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually remember when Hamilton had its first Asian councillor elected, Philip Young, who passed away sadly while he was in office. And when he was elected, it was big news because up until then, the council had elected, I think it was 1 or 2 Māori councillors in its whole existence. And then suddenly you've got somebody like Philip on, and Philip was a really lovely guy, very passionate about his communities, but no Māori voices around the table. And it kind of added this highlight of, we got this great new perspective. But now we're missing this, and we can see that we're missing this. That wasn't really picked up on beforehand. So I think our councils and our elected bodies need to evolve to showcase how our society's evolving. And good people running is the way to do that.
So, all right. Well, thank you for your time. You talk politics on your channel every day.
I'm
until
sorry
all
about
hours of the night. I don't know how you have a family life, but
I'm actually very lucky in that respect. All my kids are adults now. I don't have to deal with them unless it's an absolute emergency.
So we'll wind up with a final chat then. Are you optimistic about the general sailing course of this waka? A political waka, or do you see that good outshines bad? And I know bad in different people's mind is a subjective term, but
I think it goes in cycles, and people need to remember it goes in cycles. It can feel really tough right now for certain people, certain groups, because, it is tough right now for them. But we do tend to see political cycles go ahead. If you were to sit down with somebody in Germany, 1943, who is Jewish or gay or disabled, they'd be going through a really shit time for obvious reasons. If you could sit down and talk to somebody in those communities now, things are very different sort of society, and we know society changes and moves on. I think it'll happen here. Hopefully not to that extreme that we saw in World War II for obvious reasons. But there's always cycles. It'll happen. Things will get better for people. And I suspect what we're seeing as well in terms of the most angry, vitriolic people out there, the echo chamber's getting smaller and smaller. So they're going to have less and less impact. There might be a time or two where they show up in public and make a little bit of noise. But generally speaking, people are much better than they are worse.
I like the quote that you've got on the top of your website that never let truth get in the way of I've got it around the wrong way, haven't I?
Never let a lie get in the way of
a good story.
Yeah, something along those. It's up there somewhere. I wrote it a while ago. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Right.
Yes. It reminds me that where we're at today, and how we think about things, that and people who are watching me and the conversations like the last one. I've chatted to you twice now on camera. That people will say, "Oh, gee, we're more than just friends," and what my quote is, it'll make people talk about. And that's good. Talk. That's what we want them to do. We want them to talk.
It feeds the algorithm.
It feeds the algorithm. Thank you, Paul.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Lovely. All right. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. You
good
too.
Fight.
We'll try.
Thank you.